There was a road in Normandy that mattered more than it looked. It did not run through Paris, Berlin, or any capital marked in bold on a staff officer's map. It crossed two narrow pieces of water east of Caen, where the Caen Canal and the River Orne cut across the left flank of the Allied invasion zone. To anyone passing through in peacetime, the crossings near Benouville and Ranville were ordinary bridges. To the soldiers preparing for June 6, 1944, they were something else entirely. They were a gate. If that gate stayed open for the Germans, armor could move toward Sword Beach and strike the British landing force while it was still vulnerable. If that gate was destroyed, British airborne troops east of the Orne could be isolated. But if the bridges were taken intact and held, the entire eastern shoulder of the Normandy beachhead would have a fighting chance. This was the mission given to Major John Howard and a small force built around D Company of the Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry, supported by Royal Engineers and glider pilots. They were not being asked to storm a city, break a fortified line, or win a battle by weight of numbers. They were being asked to do something more precise and more unforgiving. Fly silently into occupied France before the seaborne landings, land almost on top of the objective, seize both bridges before the Germans could react, and hold them until relief arrived from the beaches. The margin for failure was almost non-existent. 6 Horsa gliders would cross the channel in darkness. There would be no engines once they were released, no second attempt, no room for correction if the pilots misjudged the final approach. A landing too far away would give the German sentries time to fire, radio, or prepare demolitions. A landing in the wrong field could scatter the assault force before it even began. A landing in the water could end the mission before a single shot was fired. Yet the plan depended on one belief that the Germans had not fully considered. They expected an invasion from the sea. They expected landing craft, naval bombardment, and infantry struggling across beaches under fire. They did not expect the first decisive blow of D-Day to arrive without engine noise, in the dark, from the sky. That unexpected direction was the weakness hidden inside the German plan. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had studied the coastline with a clear understanding of what an Allied landing would require. He believed the decisive battle had to be fought close to the beaches, before the invaders could unload heavy equipment, organize artillery, and create a secure bridgehead. In that narrow judgment, he was correct. The first hours of June 6 were the hours in which the Allies were most exposed. But German command did not move with Rommel's urgency. The defense of France was caught between competing theories. Rommel wanted armor close enough to strike at once. Other senior commanders feared Allied air power and preferred to keep panzer reserves farther inland, ready to counterattack once the main invasion point was certain. Hitler's personal control over important armored reserves added another layer of delay. The result was not a clean defensive system, but a machine that needed permission before it could react. On paper, the eastern flank near Caen still looked dangerous for the Allies. The German 21st Panzer Division was the only armored division positioned close enough to make an immediate counterattack on D-Day. If it moved quickly toward Sword Beach, and if it found a route through the crossings near Benouville, it could threaten the British landing force before the beachhead was fully formed. This was not fantasy. It was exactly the kind of counterstroke German doctrine was built to deliver. That is why the bridges mattered. They were not simply local objectives for airborne troops. They were part of the road system through which a German counterattack might become real. The Caen Canal Bridge and the Orne River Bridge sat close together, but operationally they formed one barrier. Lose one, and movement became difficult. Lose both, and the eastern route toward the beaches was broken at the very moment speed mattered most. British planners understood this clearly. The airborne landing east of the Orne was meant to shield the left flank of the seaborne invasion. Howard's coup de main force had to seize the bridges intact because destruction would trap airborne troops on the wrong side of the water, while German possession would leave the door open to armor. The mission was therefore built around a contradiction. The bridges had to be captured so quickly that the Germans could not destroy them, and then defended so stubbornly that the Germans could not use them. For months before the invasion, Howard trained his men as if the operation would be decided not by bravery alone, but by memory, timing, and discipline. They rehearsed attacks on bridges again and again, by day and by night, until the sequence became mechanical. The men learned where each platoon would run, which enemy position it would clear, where the engineers would search for demolition charges, and how quickly the first defensive perimeter had to be established. The point was not merely to capture ground. The point was to remove hesitation. The glider pilots carried an equally heavy burden. A parachute drop could scatter men across fields and villages, but a glider assault could deliver a fighting group directly onto its target, if the pilot was accurate enough. That, if carried the whole mission. The Horsa gliders were large wooden aircraft, silent after release, and difficult to land under perfect conditions. Normandy offered darkness, obstacles, and German territory below. Yet the plan required the leading gliders to come down almost beside the bridges, close enough for the troops inside to be fighting before the defenders fully understood what had happened. Late on June 5th, the force took off from RAF Tarrant Rushton in Dorset. The gliders were towed across the channel by Halifax bombers. Inside them, the men waited in darkness with weapons, ammunition, explosives, radios, and the knowledge that the invasion of Western Europe had already begun for them. Even though the beaches were still hours away, there was no speech that could make the mission easier. There was only training, and the narrow confidence that came from having repeated the impossible until it felt almost ordinary. Shortly after midnight on June 6th, the first gliders were released over Normandy. From that moment, the pilots had no engines to save them. They had altitude, judgment, and the black shape of the French countryside rising beneath them. The lead glider, piloted by Staff Sergeant Jim Walwork with Major Howard aboard, came down with violent force near the canal bridge. The landing shattered the nose and threw men forward, but it had achieved what planning had demanded. The glider had stopped within a few dozen meters of the objective. For the German sentries, the sound was not immediately recognizable as an attack. It was sudden, heavy, and strange. For Howard's men, it was the signal to move. They had arrived exactly where the German plan had not expected them. The assault did not unfold like a large battle. It unfolded like a sudden break in the German understanding of the night. The first men out of the gliders had no time to admire the accuracy of the landing. They had trained for movement, not celebration. Lieutenant Den Brotheridge's platoon drove toward the canal bridge, while the other platoons moved according to the plan that had been rehearsed so often in England that it had become instinct. The Germans had weapons, sentry posts, and demolition preparations. What they did not have was warning. This was the difference between a normal attack and Howard's coup de main. A normal assault gave the defender signs. Artillery, aircraft, noise, confusion spreading ahead of the troops. Here, the warning and the attack arrived almost together. By the time the defenders understood that the shapes near the bridge were not accidents in the dark, British soldiers were already crossing the span. Brotheridge led the charge across the canal bridge and was mortally wounded during the fighting. His death gave the operation its first human cost, and it came within minutes of success. The bridge was not taken cleanly, and it was not taken without sacrifice. But the essential fact remained. The Germans had not blown it. The demolition equipment that might have turned the crossing into twisted steel and broken roadway was neutralized before it could change the course of the morning. At the River Orne Bridge, the same basic result was achieved. The plan had divided the gliders so that the canal bridge and river bridge could be seized almost simultaneously. That simultaneity mattered. If one bridge fell and the other remained in German hands, the route was still contested. If one bridge was captured intact but the other was destroyed, the tactical picture became uncertain. Howard needed both. In the first minutes of D-Day, he got both. Only then did the mission change. The men were no longer attackers. They were defenders. The problem was no longer whether they could surprise the Germans, but whether fewer than 200 men could hold a position that German commanders would eventually understand they had to recover. The bridges had been seized by speed and stealth. They would now have to be held by fire discipline, anti-tank weapons, and endurance. The first phase had lasted minutes. The second would last for hours, and every hour mattered. Those hours exposed the true imbalance of the fight. Howard's men had achieved surprise, but surprise could not refill ammunition, enlarge the perimeter, or turn light infantry into an armored force. Once the Germans realized the bridges had been lost, the British position became both vital and vulnerable. It was vital because the crossings blocked a route toward Sword Beach. It was vulnerable because the force holding them was small, lightly equipped, and surrounded by enemy-held ground. The German reaction came unevenly, which was exactly what the British needed. Local troops probed toward the crossings, but they did not arrive as one coordinated blow. Some came forward without a full understanding of what had happened. Others were delayed by confusion, darkness, airborne landings elsewhere, and the larger shock of the invasion. Every German pause gave the British more time to dig in, organize fields of fire, and prepare for the next attempt. The 7th Parachute Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Richard Pinecoffin, was meant to reinforce the bridge area after the glider assault. Its drop, like many airborne operations that night, was scattered. Men landed across a wide area, some far from their intended positions. But enough reached the bridgehead to strengthen Howard's perimeter and help hold Benouville and the approaches around the canal. The battle was no longer simply about 2 strips of metal and roadway. It had become a defensive shield for the whole left flank of the invasion. This is where the German counterattack began to lose its shape. The 21st Panzer Division remained the great danger near Cannes, but danger on a map is not the same as power delivered at the right place and hour. Reports came in from the beaches, from airborne drop zones, from bridges, from villages, and from units that did not yet understand whether they were facing raids or the main invasion. German armor needed clarity, fuel, orders, and routes. The British had already taken away one of the most important routes. By late morning, the sound coming from the west changed the meaning of the fight. Commandos of Lord Lovat's 1st Special Service Brigade, having landed on Sword Beach, pushed inland toward the bridges. Their arrival was more than relief for exhausted men. It was confirmation that Howard's isolated mission had joined with the seaborne invasion. The gate had not only been seized, it had remained closed long enough for the Allied front to connect. That connection was the point at which a daring airborne raid became a strategic success. The men who had landed in the dark had not destroyed a German army. They had not stopped every tank in Normandy. But they had done something more precise. They had closed one of the doors through which a rapid German counterattack could have reached the British landing area at the moment of greatest danger. By the time German commanders understood the scale of the invasion, the opportunity was already slipping away. Sword Beach had not been crushed in the first hours. The airborne flank had not collapsed. The bridges had not been blown, and they had not been retaken. What should have been a fast German movement toward the coast became a delayed, confused, and contested response. This is why the story of Pegasus Bridge remains larger than the size of the force that captured it. 181 British soldiers, delivered by glider before dawn, changed the timing of D-Day. And in war, timing can decide everything. They succeeded because training met accuracy, surprise met discipline, and a small unit understood that its mission was not small at all. The Germans had prepared for beaches, bombardments, and landing craft. They had not prepared for silent gliders landing beside a bridge in the dark. Before the great armies of D-Day had fully come ashore, the eastern gate to the battlefield had already been seized. And because that bridge held, Germany's counterattack never arrived in time. If this story helped you see D-Day differently, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for more forgotten battles that changed the course of history.